Oats have become one of the most controversial foods on social media, declared a superfood by some and a health hazard by others, responsible for spiking your blood sugar or containing harmful chemicals. The confusion is real and it's hard to know who to believe. I'm Ruth, retired doctor turned nutritionist, and in this video I'll take a deep dive into the 6 most common claims about oats and see if they stand up to scrutiny by assessing the evidence. By the end of this video, you'll have cut through the noise and learned the truth about oats according to science, so you can breakfast with confidence. Claim number 1. Oats are a superfood. Let's look at that word, superfood, because there's no agreed scientific definition and no committee who awards it. It's a marketing term used to sell products, not describe nutritional science. And what decades of nutritional science has shown is that it's overall diet pattern that predicts health outcomes, not single foods. Focusing on single foods or even single nutrients is reductive and it distorts how we should think about eating. Plus, it sucks out all the joy, and food should be one of life's pleasures. So superfood is a marketing label, and this claim isn't upheld. The evidence on oats stands and falls on its own merits, and that is precisely what we're here to look at. Claim number 2, oats lower cholesterol. Oats contain something called beta-glucan, which lowers cholesterol. So what is it? Well, it's a type of fibre. Fibre is the part of a carbohydrate that isn't absorbed. It passes into the colon. And there's 2 types: soluble, which dissolves in water to make a gel-like substance, and insoluble, which doesn't. It adds bulk to poo instead. Fibre ferments in the colon, producing something called short-chain fatty acids like butyrate, which have beneficial anti-inflammatory properties. Beta-glucans are a type of soluble fibre found in the cell walls in oats and barley. They bind cholesterol and bile salts in the bowel, increasing their excretion in poo. The liver then pulls cholesterol from the bloodstream to replace the lost bile salts. The argument from oat critics is that beta-glucans only make up 4% of oats, which is true, but I prefer to look at the end results. Multiple meta-analyses, I'll put them in the description, show that 3 grams of oat beta-glucans lower LDL cholesterol by 0.25 to 0.66 millimoles per litre. A reminder, LDL cholesterol causes atherosclerosis, which is the furring up of arteries. And a more recent study has shown that oats also reduce blood triglycerides, which also contribute to atherosclerosis. And if you're wondering what 3 grams of beta-glucans looks like, there's 1 gram in 30 grams of rolled oats, or 1 to 2 tablespoons of oat bran. Now, the detractors will say, Pat, that reduction is tiny. But here's the thing, no one is eating those oats in isolation. We can add in other cholesterol-reducing foods, for example, soya, nuts, barley, or the plant stanols found in fortified products, and eat them in the context of an overall heart-healthy diet with plenty of vegetables, whole grains, unsaturated fats, and lean protein. The effect is additive. Plus, it's helpful to look at the endpoints that matter. Multiple meta-analyses of observational studies have shown that oat consumption is associated with a reduction in all-cause mortality, so dying of any cause, obesity, and blood pressure. The reduction in cholesterol may be modest, but it's real, and the health benefits extend beyond cholesterol, so this claim is upheld. And if you're enjoying my approach to the science of nutrition, why not sign up for my weekly newsletter? It comes out every Friday and I share helpful content on nutrition, healthy aging and creating lasting habits for women over 50. Claim number 3, oats spike glucose. Now this is a biggie, so feel free to pause and go and make yourself a brew. There are 2 parts to this one. Firstly, considering if glucose spikes really are a problem, and secondly, thinking about how we eat oats. So firstly, glucose spikes. And this is one of the biggest sources of nutrition misinformation on social media. The rhetoric goes like this: frequent spikes of glucose trigger the release of insulin. This causes the body to lock energy in fat cells so it can't be burned, driving the consumption of more calories. This is called the carbohydrate insulin model of obesity. Plus, that frequent insulin spikes wear out the pancreas, leading to insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. Sounds reasonable, and there is some truth in there, as insulin does lead to fat storage. Except the carbohydrate insulin model is not supported by the evidence. The debate around this model is long and complex, but in summary, the evidence from carefully designed metabolic ward studies, where participants stay in a facility where food in and energy out is carefully monitored, do not support it. In this study, participants ate diets matched in calories but varying in fat and carb content. The reduced carb group did adapt in that carbohydrate burning dropped and fat burning increased, and they did secrete less insulin, but both groups lost weight. In fact, the reduced fat group lost more despite no change in their fat burning ability. And in a crossover trial where participants ate both a higher carb plant-based diet and a ketogenic diet, food intake did not increase due to higher insulin on the high carb diet. Food intake was actually higher on the keto diet. So both these experiments showed the opposite of what the carbohydrate insulin model predicts. Plus, if we look at the GLP-1 agonist drugs like Ozempic and Mounjaro, part of how they work is telling your pancreas to release more insulin when you eat, and yet they cause highly efficient fat loss. They improve insulin sensitivity because the best way to improve insulin sensitivity is to lose weight. Moving on to those glucose spikes. Frequent spikes do not cause type 2 diabetes, and there are several bits of information that back this up. Number one, protein also spikes insulin. You just can't measure it with a continuous glucose monitor. And higher protein diets don't predict the development of type 2 diabetes. Number two, if you look at the amount of insulin produced over a day, it's actually less with 6 smaller carb-containing meals than 3 larger ones. So frequent glucose spikes don't seem to stress the pancreas more. Number three, insulin resistance is thought to be due to an excess of body fat in the wrong place. So the deep belly visceral fat that infiltrates into our liver and pancreas, stopping them working efficiently and releasing inflammatory compounds. The biggest predictor of the development of type 2 diabetes is carrying excess visceral fat. Although we should note that there are other causes and genetics also plays a significant role. And number four, multiple human randomized controlled trials have shown that any diet that reduces weight, including higher carbohydrate diets, improves insulin sensitivity and can put type 2 diabetes into remission. So should we all be paranoid about any glucose spikes? Well, no, they're a normal physiological response to a fuel the body was literally designed to run on. People will say carbs are non-essential. And yes, this is strictly true in that we have our fat stores as a backup plan, but it's not about essential, it's about what's efficient. And the brain and red blood cells use glucose as their preferential or only source of fuel. The problem is not a transient spike in an insulin-sensitive person. The problem is prolonged spikes in a person with insulin resistance, where the ability of the cells to take glucose out of the bloodstream is impaired. The prolonged raised glucose is what causes the tissue damage, not the transient spike. And here, that raised glucose is the symptom of the insulin resistance, not the cause. For people with established insulin resistance, there is an argument for reducing large glucose rises by focusing on lower glycemic index complex carbohydrates with more fibre. And we should all be eating more fibre because it has multiple health benefits. Still with me? Moving on to number 2, how should we eat oats? The ones to avoid are the highly refined quick oats, which are low in fibre. Rolled oats, well, they're higher in fibre, and the less processed jumbo oats are pretty filling. Steel cut or pinhead oats maintain the outer coating of the oat. They take longer to cook, but are higher in fibre. But the highest is oat bran, which is really quick to cook. In experiments looking at glycemic or glucose response, eating thick oat flakes led to a significantly lower glucose response than quick cook oats and compared to a control. Now, I have seen criticism online of these experiments because they compared to white bread. But what they don't say is this is precisely how you determine glycemic index experimentally. You compare to a high sugar control. Sometimes pure glucose is used, sometimes white bread. That's literally how you do the experiment. I also don't consider this a valid critique because it relies on the assumption that any glucose spike is bad for you, and that is simply not the case according to the data. So in terms of what oats to eat, go for the higher fibre version. I like a mixture of jumbo oats and oat bran, and if you want an even lower glycemic index food, try barley flakes. They take longer to cook, but they're really tasty and satisfying. It's also a good idea to create a balanced breakfast by adding a little unsaturated fat and protein. I like to add seeds, mixed berries and Greek yoghurt. And if you want to up the protein content further, a top tip is to stir in a little egg white as your oatmeal is cooking, or some protein powder, whatever you prefer. So going back to the claim, yes, oats do cause a glucose spike, but in most people this is normal physiology, not an actual problem. Slower cooked oats are a mid-glycemic index food and paired with protein and a little fat make a balanced and very tasty breakfast. Claim number 4, oats aren't gluten-free. Now this one is all about semantics. Gluten is a protein found in wheat, barley and rye, not in oats. But most oats are not gluten-free because they get contaminated by gluten-containing grains during the harvest or processing. And this is why gluten-free oats are specifically sold, because they're free from these contaminants. But I have seen claims that they're not truly gluten-free as they contain a protein called avenin, which is similar to gluten. And again, this is true, but it's still not gluten. So let's bring it back to the real world and the research. Do people with celiac disease have a problem with avenin? The evidence from feeding studies in humans, not cells in a petri dish, says the majority don't. And in this feeding study, 29% of people with celiac disease mounted an inflammatory response to avenin with mild symptoms. But with ongoing exposure, there was no deterioration in inflammatory markers, nor any change in the small bowel wall on biopsy. And yes, these brave folk underwent a biopsy in the name of science. Respect. In one person, so 3%, there was a severe reaction similar to reaction to gluten. The researchers concluded that most people with celiac are okay with gluten-free oats. But if you have celiac disease, this is definitely one to discuss with whoever advises on your diet, be it a gastroenterologist or specialist dietitian, not from random people on the internet, and that includes me. The other aspect to the claim could, of course, be that we should all avoid gluten, but I have yet to find any experimental data suggesting gluten is a problem for people who don't have either celiac disease or non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So this claim is not upheld. Claim number 5, oats contain anti-nutrients. The concern here is about something called phytates, which bind to minerals. Oats are nutritious and they contain vitamins B1, B5, B6, folate, magnesium, selenium, iron, copper and zinc. However, the absorption of zinc and iron in particular are significantly reduced by the phytates. Sounds scary, but in reality, if we're eating a balanced diet, we'll get our minerals elsewhere. Of note, the people complaining that beta-glucans make up just 4% of oats tend to warn about phytates, but they make up only 0.4 to 1.2%. To reduce the impact of phytates, the common advice is to soak the grain, which activates enzyme called phytases that break it down. However, this doesn't really work with oats as they naturally don't contain much of this enzyme and it tends to get removed through processing. There's very little research on this that I could find, so I've had a look online and the answer from cooks is to soak them overnight and add a small amount of a flour high in these phytases, these enzymes, for example rye or spelt, and acidify the water slightly by adding yogurt or a squeeze of lemon juice. So this claim is true, oats do contain phytates, but the real world impact is negligible. Claim 6. Oats contain glyphosates. Glyphosate is a pesticide. It's characterised as Group 2A by the International Agency for Research on Cancer, which means it's probably carcinogenic, but there's limited data in people. The biggest concern raised is that it's licensed in many countries, including the UK, for spraying on crops pre-harvest to help dry them out. This means more of it is present in the end product. But the regulators say there is no evidence of harm. This study, published in 2020, was an analysis of glyphosate residues in foods in Canada. It concluded that levels were safe for consumers, but they were highest in wheat, barley and oats. But harm in humans is pretty hard to quantify as we can't ethically do a trial where we feed the stuff to people and look for long-term health outcomes. So avoiding it is a perfectly reasonable course of action, and if you want to avoid glyphosates altogether, then buy organic. A critique of organic is that it's a luxury which not all can afford, which is true. However, online wholesalers are cheaper than supermarkets. In the UK, buy Whole Foods online or Hobmadod's are both really good. And if you know of any online wholesalers in the US, Canada or Australia, please share them in the comments for other viewers. That'd be great. The glyphosate claim is upheld, and if it's a concern, organic oats are a straightforward swap. But across all 6 claims, the picture based on the science is clear. Oats are a solid, well-evidenced food. Pick the least processed type you can, organic if you prefer. Pair them well, eat with confidence, and don't forget my newsletter for more of this kind of thing. And if yogurt is part of your breakfast too, the type you choose matters more than you might think. I've done the breakdown of what's best for weight loss, protein and gut health, and I'll leave it here and see you there.